me on. I really appreciate it.
Cool. We're going to be talking about Repugnant RPG, which is coming out next month. Is that right? Next month?
Next month, yeah. We actually we did a little pushback. We were going to come out on the 1st. We changed that for 2 reasons. We pushed back to the 15th, so it's a partnership between myself from Plus One Games and then John DeCampos from Token Terrors. And so we partnered up. John said, "Hey, do you want to make an RPG for this event called Zine Quest that's coming up?" I did a Zine Quest last year for my game Beards and Beyond, and he had never designed an RPG before, so he came in with this really gross and awesome world that he had kind of an idea around and said, "Can we build something on this?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so we're doing that. And yeah, February 15th is the launch date.
Okay. So that is coming up. So before we get into that, tell us about yourself and, beards, your beard shirt, and all the beard stuff you do in the community. Because I've seen beard balm everywhere. So let's talk about yourself first.
All over the place, right? Yeah. So I always jokingly say that I am an entrepreneur, beard balm magnate, game designer, and missionary who lives in Philadelphia. So I moved here from Seattle about a year and a half ago. I've got a wife and 4 kids. We all picked up. Moved across the country. We desperately miss Seattle, but I'm a Dallas native. We have family here locally, and I was working 3 jobs, and then I would do like game design and some other stuff on the side, and realized if I just paid myself from one of the jobs that I ran, which was making beard balm, that I could just afford to live and not work the other 2 jobs. Before that, we were just giving all the money away to other organizations, which feels really good. There's a level of vanity behind probably also though too. And it was much better to just kind of make that shift, and it freed up time for us to launch another beard balm brand, which is all tabletop focused, which is a huge part of what I love. Let me focus more on making games. A couple of years ago, I had built a game called Beards and Beyond that was a lead magnet for the concept about starting this thing. And then last Zine Quest, we put it together, and it's now this RPG. These actually just came in the printer last week, so these are about to ship out to everybody all over the place. And we're doing some stuff with Tabletop Backer Party crew to help promote that in February. So we'll be pushing that out alongside getting Zine Quest up and ready to go. But yeah, it was like beards are a huge part. And one of my friends was like, "Do you think you could make a beard-based RPG?" And I was like, not a full one probably, but like a 2-page fun, silly, dumb thing about beards and RPGs. I said, absolutely, I could do that. So I sat down for like a week, jammed it out. And then a couple years later, when Zine Quest was happening, a bunch of my friends were running it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to run it. And 3 weeks later, launched a campaign.
3 weeks. Okay.
Yeah. And we did almost 10x funding on the campaign. And so because of all the other work we do, the nice thing is I have a graphic designer who does art direction for me on projects all the time that I already work with. I have all kinds of people who we're tied into. And then I'd been working with people in the games industry doing different things for a year and a half at that point. I'd run a failed Kickstarter the year before that for another game that we're hoping to bring back later on this year. And a lot of other stuff that had just let me figure out how to do that and do it well. And the core of the game was already done. So then it was just about developing out the other assets.
Wow. That's a lot going on with you. That's for sure. And a lot of it kind of ties back together too. Right. So before we get into that, how did you get into kind of game design, creating RPGs and things like that? Because it's not just something you just do, right? How'd you stumble into it? How'd you get started?
Yeah, so I always loved games. Growing up, my mom was a teacher, so we would always have a mix of like normal board games and educational games laying around the house. And so we grew up playing a lot of the classics. Risk was probably my go-to favorite as a kid, but like Living Labyrinth, which gets reprinted even to today, is a game that I used to love playing all the time. And I don't remember the rules or how it's played, but I remember playing it a lot. And would just play all the time. I played Dungeons and Dragons when I was probably 9, just a box set, and just for like half a session, and it was somebody's older brother, so I don't think we played it right. And I then ended up working in youth ministry, and so not only was I running like upfront games or screen games, I would use gamification in a lot of the work that I did a lot of study around how to use game theory in education and formation, again because of my mom's like I said, all those educational games growing up with my mom. I was like, games can actually teach really well if you use them right, or they can teach very poorly and be bad games if you do them wrong. And so I got really into low ropes, experiential education, outdoor education, and we would build these weekend long experiences for adults and kids that were basically essentially like kids would show up for a weekend, or a group would show up for a weekend, adults or youth. And we would basically run them through a 2 or 3 day mini LARP, and they would have no idea what that term was if I had thrown it out. But essentially what we would have created was a highly thematic learning experience that we were leading everyone through. And so it was always like pro-social group development. Game theory is really where my learning background in game development took off, which is, in anything I design, whether it's a board game or an RPG, my question is always like, what is someone's experience at the table? Like, what's the experience I want them to have? And what's the thematic hook that helps me bring them to that experience? And then we build mechanics to help fill in, the theme to that experience.
Got it. Okay, so you kind of have like an end goal in mind, and you find a way to hook people in the front end to get them through this like kind of tunnel of like your game, and then kind of have them reach this end goal.
Right. Yeah, and oftentimes, like with any game, like the play is the thing. So it's not just like getting them to the end goal, but it is what is the experience we desire to people to have along the way, and that influences a lot of things, from marketing to how we build in, design aspects to mechanics that we'll choose, because, one mechanic may just legitimately be more fun, even if it's not as thematic. And then we might just finesse the theme a little bit to say, okay, how do we fit that in? But the end goal is certainly going to be like, hey, we desired for a game, an RPG tabletop, people to have a good time, for them to sit around at a table and to be able to explore an idea. But the playing itself is a lot of the times the focus. Our goal is to get them to the point where they are doing the thing that we designed, and fun being the outcome of that. And where they choose to navigate in that, even though it is kind of a tunnel, like you said, tends to be a lot of the things that I get the most excited about in play, which is why storytelling games, RPG, like very sandboxy design tends to be a lot of the things that I gravitate towards.
Great. So this is a great transition into talking about Repugnant RPG that is coming up on February 15th on Kickstarter. Tell us about Repugnant RPG and like what it's about.
Yeah, so our tagline for the game is the world's grossest RPG, which is definitely a shot across Dungeons and Dragons bow, which they won't care about or even notice, because it's not even a scale conversation. But John came to me, and John, if you're anybody who's not familiar with him, you can go find him online, look up Token Tears, phenomenal game he did last year. He said, do you want to do an RPG? And I was like, yes, let's set up a meeting for Monday. We can talk through what we want to do, thinking like we'd get together and come up with a theme and all that stuff and kind of kick it out. He's like, great, here's what I'm thinking. And he sent me like 2 or 3 pages outlined of just like some locations, some character concepts, a few races, and just a general kind of thing where he wanted it to be the world's grossest RPG. And John's art style is like popping eyeballs, hyper grotesque. You can do some really beautiful detailed work. You can do a very soft comic feel, but the stuff he really gravitates to has this beautifully grotesque quality to it a lot of the time, that lends itself to that kind of design. So he kind of came in with this world already built, and I am somebody who, again, I love to say, yeah, what's the theme? Like, what are we trying to do? Like, let me run with that. And so it'll be about a 40 to 52 page RPG when it's all said and done. We'll start getting the final page count. That'll be a very minimalist system, easy for anyone to pick up. It'll be riddled with art. Like a lot of the times as I'm doing even just basic layout right now, I'm saying, all right, I want to only type up this much space because I want John to be able to fill this much space with art that showcases something about what's in this small, text block. And so there'll be a huge visual feel to it. Zine Quest Projects, which is what this is a part of, which is this really interesting like thing that Kickstarter does that I feel like most of the board game industry is massively unaware of, because it's tabletop role-playing game stuff, and those are connected but separate parts of the gaming community a lot of the time. Where it is the same size as Beards and Beyond. So this kind of A5, half letter size sheet, and it's typically designed with just one color. So you pick one color and you stick to it. So we're using like greens for our entire thing. So the paper will be light green. We'll scale up to like a very black color. We'll do some variations in the middle with things, but it comes out of these like old school like late 70s, early 80s, early Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing game materials. Like they didn't print back in the day these big, like full color, heavy books with hard backs. They printed a 20-page little pamphlet zine that didn't necessarily even have all the rules to it. It was like kind of figure it out as you go. Like here's a basic idea of a game. Now you go play and you figure it out. And so Zine Quest is the thing they do in February now for 3 years in Kickstarter to try and encourage people to make that type of content. It's a really easy entry point into Kickstarter. Like I said, last year I ran one, I prepped one, ran it very successfully in 3 weeks. And so a lot of the knowledge for Kickstarter that you would use for a regular campaign holds the day, but there's some, it's a way easier to get started, get up and run it, because you're talking about a $500 goal or $200 goal for even some very small projects, because people are just trying to get it printed and get it out into the world. And the cost is nowhere near as high.
Wow, that's really amazing. That again, you had that successful campaign last year, and you're going to pretty much take all those learnings and then apply it to the one this year that you're going to be working on that you're working on with John.
Yeah, and Terrible Games is really kind of leading the, like I'm doing the system design. We've got a really like mildly obnoxious D2 system we're working on. So if anybody's doesn't know what a D2 is, you probably have one in your pocket. It's a coin. But we actually really want triangular D2s, so you'll have to print them out and like fold them, or like we'll have a Kickstarter level that you can get wood etched ones that I'll make here on my laser cutter. That'll be kind of a premium material, but it's kind of an oracle system. So we'll have this sheet that you drop these D2s onto, and what side they land on, and where they land on the sheet will let the GM basically read what happened in the role that you did. And so I'm actually super thrilled by it. Like we developed it in about a day. We play tested it. There's some light Dex mechanics. So we're figuring out the accessibility components to that right now, making sure that Dex doesn't ruin that, and that anybody can still get a good roll if they want to just convert to like a D8 or a D6. So we're working that out still, finessing that piece. But yeah, it's been a thrill to kind of just design a system that really fits this feel in the same way that we had done for Beards and Beyond. Like I'm a big fan of like naming your systems. You know, like we have, you know, Dungeons and Dragons runs on Dungeons and Dragons. The name of the game is the name of the thing. But a lot of other games out there now, it's like Powered by the Apocalypse came out of the game Apocalypse World, but it powers Dungeon World and Masks and all these other role-playing games. So like Beards and Beyond is called Founded in Follicle. This one's called Covered in Chits, is our name for this system. And it is, depending on what you're doing and what your stats are and what your skills you're using, you take a big hunkin' chunk of these chits and then you just like toss them out onto this sheet and you kind of see what comes out of the situation because of that. So it opens up a whole lot more narrative than I rolled a 6, I hit. I didn't roll a 6, I didn't hit. You know, like so I'm super excited about that too.
That's awesome. I know we didn't talk about this before, but do you have any of these pieces that you could kind of like do a teaser of or show?
I can grab the I mean, I have prototypes which are literally like marked on one side and I'm marked. I can show you the wood pieces that we're using as the basis.
Cool. Well, this is totally live here. So Tony's going to get little pieces to show us. Thank you for everyone who's tuning in. If you have any questions for Tony, feel free to leave it on, you know, wherever you're watching, and then it'll come up on our side and Tony will be able to answer those questions for you. And to everyone here, thank you for being here. Hello. All right.
Sorry, I'm rearranging everything down here right now because we've had a lot of games come in the last couple of weeks. So, yeah. So like these are the wooden chits. The paper ones will be like you'll cut out a piece of paper and you'll basically fold it up. But then there'll be basically it'll have like a little Triforce looking symbol on one side, on both sides, and one of the Triforce pieces will be filled in on one, and two of the Triforce pieces will be filled on the other, and that'll tell you whether you got 1 hit or 2 hits off of it. And so you're never missing, like you're always succeeding to some degree. But you may have to hit a certain threshold to have what you want to have happen. You may get such a low number that nothing happens. If it goes off the paper, I guess it is a miss currently. Like that's our current model. Like if you miss the paper, you did miss the thing. But again, typically you're rolling a minimum of 1, but usually you're adding in 3 or 4 more to that process to kind of figure out what you get. And yeah, it's just been a really fun kind of piece to mess around with. We're still messing on the actual design, but I'll take big sheets of wood and end up cutting them down into individual like chip pieces for anybody who gets that I think it's going to be $25 like premium level that'll come with some other stuff too. And then we're doing a map that'll be an insert into the zine also too that John's going to do. So it'll be an 11 by 17 that folds down a few times and then just sticks right in the thing. And that'll be a map of the world people are exploring called the Crust. Yeah, which it's not post-apocalyptic. It's hard to tell people this, but the setting is kind of like imagine Wall-E, where the world just kind of gets covered in trash, except for a bunch of people stay and they just don't mind and they live there, and roach people appear and rat people appear and hog people appear, and everyone just kind of lives on this crust, and that things have mutated over time, and that some people have gone off into space and they've been in deep freeze and kind of this giant refrigerator structure out in the asteroid belt. And those are kind of like the big bads, and some of them will have just landed back on Earth trying to start to reclaim it. But the whole feel is like gross is good. And so one of the conceits of the game is that, you can either just say, I want to do this, at which point you'll roll or you'll fling your chits based on just your stats. But if you want that extra one chit, you describe in some disgusting manner what your character does, and you get a bonus chit when you do that. It's just to kind of embrace, like, there's not a lot of games out there. There's a lot of games out there where you're just playing these like pristine, like high power heroes. There's some where you're playing as like clever and calculating villains, but there's none that were just like, what if we were just all skeezy, gross, like weird creatures just trying to make it through the day, helping our like little, village of other gross creatures survive. And what if we made a game like that? So that's kind of the thematic route that we went down. And so to embrace it, it's like, you can just say like, I want to pop a zit at that guy and hit him, or you can describe what popping that zit looks like, which we don't have to do right now. So
it seems like it was a fun time creating it. Like, talk us through the creation process. Were you and John just kind of like sitting down and just like throwing ideas at each other, like to build up this world? Or was it really just those 2-3 pages that John sent out and you just went to work building?
Yeah. His was like, it was 2-3 pages of ideas. And I was like, let me pass through on this and just add some text and see kind of what you think. And so went through, did some, ramping up on words. Like, I'm a huge fan of alliteration. And so if you watch videos I do on YouTube, or look at Beards and Beyond or any of the other stuff that we do, like, you will see long streams of alliterative text where everything starts with the same line. So for me, wordplay and other stuff like that is a huge part of it. So I just went through and started messing around with some of the language, redoing that, and that got us to what was the theme and the world was built out really over the course of a week. And by the time we hopped on a call Monday after he talked to me on a Friday, we were thematically pretty much where we needed to be on where we were going. The system took about another week to suss out. I wanted something that wasn't just D6 or even normal polyhedral base. Like, I was like, if we're going to do something gross, let's pick numbers that are not the usual numbers to pick. So like, let's pick 3 stats instead of 4 stats, which, I mean, there's 3 is fairly common. Let's use a D2 because no one uses D2s for anything. We could have gone with like a D5 or a D7, but those are hard to get. And we didn't want to make like the ability to play a hard thing to do. We want it to be something people can play. And so we wanted to make a D2 system, and we wanted something that was going to just continually push up that this is a little bit gross and slightly obnoxious feel, even as we were looking at the theme and other things like that. And so that was over the course of a week. And, I was like, I had tested out a couple things. I had, drawn out on paper what the hit sheet might look like, and kind of how it might work. And, I'm down in my basement that used to be a workshop for the people who lived here previously. And, there's pipes running overhead. So I just stuck my phone up above my one of my desks a couple of times and just like put the sheet out. I'd hop on a call with John and say like, all right, here's what I'm thinking about how this stuff might work. And, I'd throw some out and we'd look at some of the different stat pieces and I just, walk him through, here are my ideas on it. And he'd have input, we'd finesse, we'd talk through it. Every once in a while I'd pop it out like to other designers who are in that kind of same space and say, hey, here's something we're looking at. What are your thoughts on this? Overwhelmingly just good positive response the entire way through. You're always looking for like those critical bits of feedback. Like somebody'd be like, I like this, but here's what I don't understand, or here's why I wouldn't do this, because that lets us know, like, even if we decide to go with this, what's the objection that's going to come up, or what's the critique, or is there a way that we actually can say, okay, that was really good feedback. how are we doing that? I was doing an interview with a guy who runs Gallant Knight Games last night, Alan Barr. And his big thing was like, which I think is such a phenomenal piece of wisdom. Listen to other people until you know well enough to know not when to not listen to them. Like taking enough information so that you know well enough what the feedback is, so you can know what to listen to, and then what to say. Yeah, like I know this hasn't ever worked before. We're going to do it anyways because we're doing it in this way, which is different. And I didn't get any of those critical pieces of feedback, though I love them when I do. So yeah, it was a pretty smooth process, and now it's just we're making monsters, we're doing, we're filling out layout, we're typing up more stuff. I'm finessing the movement system, which we may just drop in favor of something totally narrative. Like I spent in the last week trying to figure out how I want to do movement, and at the end of the day, I'm just like, we just may say like you move, and when you move, you move. Like we have a very basic hint about how movement could work or could be broken down, but the cool thing about the setting is you could do just totally narrative theater, the mind play, or if you wanted to get really granular and do dungeon crawls and, climb down into the crust and explore the things underneath, you could do really, intense modular, like, mini play if you wanted to. So there'll be a lot of flexibility in the system. And I've got to figure out the rule set that I like for movement that matches both of those feels, or choose to just say, figure it out based on what type of game you're playing, And so that's one of the big things right now. So, we're still in that refinement phase, still in that phase. We'll do a couple of live stream actual plays the first week of February, and then the week we go live also too. We'll do a couple of actual plays just live on our stream to let people tune in, watch that, get a couple other people on there who have not played with the system yet to do it. And the cool thing about Zine Quest is a lot of times people are popping out completely finished projects, and a lot of times people are like, I had this idea earlier this week, I'm going to do a Zine Quest project and then build it over the next year. And so, I loved the mix. I loved having the core. I like having the core loop and the essential elements done. And then I like being able to toss out to a community during a campaign like, hey, what do you think about this? Let's build a character together. Let's establish a race together. Let's do a little bit of a world building process together in the middle of the campaign. Just because I want, when people get that game, for them to be able to say, hey, I didn't just back this. Like I participated in building this game with the creator. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Got it. So there's going to be a lot of interaction during your campaign. Then there's going to be a lot of ways people can get feedback, or like basically just be part of the final creation of the actual RPG.
Yeah, because this is a partnership. I don't know exactly how much there will be. I did ask John for us to leave some spots. I think what we'll probably do is take, because we really want it to be, by the time we go live, like 100% done except for those pieces, right? We want layout to be finished. We want all those other pieces to be done. And so we'll probably leave it like a few intentional blanks. Like I would love to toss out to people, like create a couple monsters for us. I would love to do a playtest PDF of like an extra race of saying like, what's the gross area we didn't explore? Let's pick that. And you guys help us build out a race. Here's the things we're looking for, kicking ideas about abilities, backgrounds, other stuff like that, and then being able to release that in kind of playtest mode as a PDF instead of as a print object. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things I think are really fun. And then having some of those like monsters or locations or even items that we can say, hey, we're going to just let people kick these in, and we've got space for 5 or 6 of them. But for me, like every time I would send out a campaign backer report, I had this one guy who probably pledged and unpledged my campaign 5 or 6 times. And I found out later on that regular updates really bother him. And he could tell that like he wanted to back our game, but he was like, I couldn't handle like the fact that you would send out an update every 48 hours. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Like I totally get that. And I respect that. We were clear from the get-go that we were going to be doing that. And so I would say, don't take that personally if people do, but overwhelmingly the positive feedback on it was tremendous. Like people loved the ongoing engagement, the ongoing conversations, the ability to kick in to like, hey, we created a character together. Like every backer was invited to submit ideas for a character that went into print into the final book. And so, yeah, we'll do some similar stuff like that with Repugnant. And I'm looking forward to kind of seeing what people come up with in it.
Yeah. So like what are kind of the gross monsters that you have right now, and what were they inspired by? So
Yeah, so I'll pull that document up. I should have done that already, but I can tell you this: the race, the we're calling them mutations, so they're not classes. You have a mutation. The mutations are olfact. So you got to figure out even how we pronounce them sometimes. Olfactori, which are like wizards, but they control the power of smell, which olfactory is like the wordplay there, right? Repugnant. Um, so they have basically a lot of different like fart based powers or like intense aroma based powers. I think one of their abilities is as halitosis, but it's mind control based halitosis. So they can breathe stinky breath into somebody's face and basically take control of their brain as it claws around in there. We have the pizza face, which is like this zit covered individual but they're also like masters of stealth. They can basically like control where the zits and other stuff covering the surface of their body are at and basically move it around like camouflage. And then they can pop zits that produce different substances out of their bodies. And those are the good guys. Like those are the
good guys. Okay.
That's a character ability, right? So those are both character abilities. And then like the Slimore is like a ranger type character where they've got a lot of movement ability, but they all have a ton of mucus based power. So they can like shoot out ropes of thick mucus or cover surfaces with mucus and then slide around on them or climb up them. Or other stuff like that. They can actually create a snot elemental essentially as a sidekick character that follows them around and that they control. Those are some of the mutations that people have, but our races were meat sacks, which are basically like hairy humans, roachers, which are roach human hybrids, vermin, which have like prehensile tails and can like dislocate bones and go like diving through the trash really easily, hoggos, and then these junk punks, which are basically hives of small like scaby style insects that have gained hive sentience and have taken over different discarded appliances and other home devices to build their bodies and emulate other humanoid creatures and can become a party member also too, which is a super fun. You actually like that race, you kind of build your body to figure out which stats and abilities you have based on that. It was a really fun one to design. But the bad guys are like also gross. They're the Yeti, which is kind of like our big bad, is like a Yeti, except for it irradiates this intense like stench and shoots like vomitous attacks out at you, right? And so there's all these different creatures. John just sent me a couple new ones. We have the boils and ghouls, which are little boys and girls, but their like bodies are stuck together. And they will follow you around the wasteland doing horrible things to you. We've got these things that spit out like acid. Lots of times we took, okay, here's what happened when your character is someone who mutated in this very helpful way. The bad guys are oftentimes people who mutated and either took it too far or just in a completely different direction. So it feels similar, but is very different. The scaboids is one he just sent me, which are these big scab covered like creatures that can like rip them off and fling them at you, but it also serves as like a blade of armor. And so it's gross. It's very gross stuff. I have written abilities for this game that like a couple of them I'll pop out in like the RPG designer group or the RPG zines group on Facebook that we're active parts of, and be like, I wrote this today and it is simultaneously, I think, the funniest and most disgusting thing I've ever written. And like one of the characters has the ability to cook using their own sweat in a way that enhances meals in a tremendous fashion, but it means they have to wipe themselves down and like drain their sweat into a meal. So just gross, just gross stuff. Like, and so it's one of those things that the game may not be for everybody, right? I think which is okay. Like, I think, when we did Beards and Beyond, it was telling people like, actually, this game is for people who don't have beards. The meta narrative was like people who have beards are always adventuring through this alternate reality. Every time we go to sleep, we're always protecting everybody who doesn't have a beard against existential threat to all humankind. We know that this game lets you take that on, but still there are people who are like, yeah, I'm just not into that. That sounds dumb. And I'm like, that's fine. If you're not into that, that's great. For Repugnant, if somebody's like, well, I just don't want to play a game where there's a lot of gross stuff that I have to describe, that's fine. Don't play our game. Like it's not going to hurt my feelings if somebody's like, just thematically I don't like that. There are games that I'm like, yeah, just thematically I don't like that. Some of them I end up loving to play as games. Like I hate the theme of Splendor. I think Splendor is a blast to play. Like I don't think the theme does anything for it. But for the most part, if a theme doesn't capture me, I'm not going to want to play that game. If Repugnant RPG doesn't sound good to somebody, that's okay. Like, that's okay.
Yeah. And so with all these characters that you're going through, they're all very varied and different. Where do you get ideas for these characters? Like, how do you, like, does any media inspire you, or is it just kind of like you're going to sleep and you like dream of these characters? How do you get these characters?
So John came up from a lot of it. And again, John, like his art style and a lot of the content he consumes is that kind of like eyeball popping, gross. There's a game a game artist called Pork that his style has some similarities to, though I think his detailing is way more articulate. John's is. And so some of that came from his just initial document. And then for me, it's like, how do I finesse this, right? Or what makes sense on this or what doesn't? So I got to lean on him largely for a lot of those initial ideas. Most of my stuff has been world building, right? So it's been like, what are the locations we can go? Or taking kind of that initial kernel of an idea John has where it may just be a word he wrote down and I don't know what it means. And I'm like going to go and write 2 paragraphs about, okay, like you called it the Yetchi. Here's what I think that is. Or, you named this class the meat sack. And then like, what does that mean? He's like, I don't know. Just like that they're sacks of meat. I think they're really hairy. And I'm like, great, hairy sacks of meat. Great. I'm going to go write 2 paragraphs and 3 abilities and a couple other things about what I think a hairy sack of meat humanoid like does. Like, what is their life like? So for me, it's a lot more of the filling that out. Typically my ideas always come from like, I think something would be funny or fun. Like that's typically 95% of my ideas are like that would just be fun to do. And we try it out, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And the nice thing is for this setting specifically, if we like try something out and it feels too dark or too gross or too weird, like that's an easy thing for us to say, okay, we're just going to push that to being a monster or a bad guy, not one of the character classes you play. And the same thing, if we are creating something we feel like, oh, this could be a really cool ability just to have in play, we can move that in, though most of the time that's more fun for characters in the collector, which is what we call the GM in the game, to figure out in play, like how would this could one of the characters use this ability potentially down the road? Is there a way for them to learn how to do this other gross thing that they haven't? And I think that's a lot of the fun of game design, is especially with RPGs. Like every other game, if you kicked it out into the world and were like, we gave you 90% of what you need to play, people would be irate. They'd be like, what are you talking about? With RPGs, the expectation is like, we gave you the core sandbox to play in and enough ideas to build things, and now you go actually make the game. Anyone who's playing an RPG is typically engaging in some level of game design. And that's the expectation. Like if I nailed down everything in a module, that's not as much fun for the GM or the players a lot of the time. And so like, we don't have to detail, hey, can they do this? We could say, maybe they could learn how to do this. Like go forth and figure that out while you guys are playing together. So for me, a lot of it, it's filling out John's ideas in this. The rest of the time, it's usually like I will get enthralled by an idea and I'm just kicking it around in my head until I get it out on paper and kick it out to the world somewhere. And sometimes it's a Facebook post, and sometimes it's a game design, and sometimes it's kicking it into somebody else's game or world or design. And seeing kind of how that fills out. But for me, because my role in this game was largely the mechanical side of things with some of the world building pieces also too, it's been more of most of it's come from, okay, I'm designing this mechanic this way. That means we also could do X. Do we have X in the world right now, right? So that was like the dungeon crawling aspect of things, like it being able to be used as a dungeon crawl. That came from the mechanics that I was designing. Like, it wasn't something explicit in that. It was actually mostly narrative. And I was like, the feel of this game, like the concept of there being this world is a crust of just garbage and filth that has gotten compacted around the world over the course of the last hundreds of years. That means there's a lot of stuff down below us inherently. And so we got to figure out, what does it mean to go down into that space, which then means, okay, well, we don't have any items that provide light or any way that light's provided. If we want people to be able to do this, we've got to provide a little bit about that. And it actually even was like, John can make phenomenal maps. He's done a couple pieces for me for Beards and Beyond. also too. And I've seen just other work he's done. And so in addition to the world map, saying, what if we made like one dungeon crawl map that goes in this? Like, it doesn't have to say like everything's a dungeon crawl, but it gives people like that classic isometric, like OSR, like classic role-playing game feel. If we can take one of those pages and just slap a map in it with a little bit of key details that say, yeah, go down into the, like, so like, you know, the Yechi has done something horrible. It's the big bad. Like, go down into its cave, and what are you going to encounter on the way down to the bottom to save the small child that went off from your homestead? Like, it's not just about saying like, these aren't bad people. Like, as gross as they are, that's just their existence. That's how they are. They can still be as heroic or as villainous or as whatever as anything else. And that's I think that's going to be a lot of the fun of the system.
Yeah. So with all this world building that you're doing, kind of filling out all the details that John initially kind of brought out, what were kind of some challenges that you had or you faced along the way, and how'd you overcome all this, right? Because a lot of it's creative, a lot of it's world building, a lot of it's just kind of taking it where you want it to. What were kind of the challenges there?
I think for us, a lot of the time, for one, it's time, right? Like day jobs, other projects for John, because he's a designer and runs the company, runs his company full time. I am self-employed, which means I've just got to manage all the different things that I do well. Like that's obviously a challenge. So figuring out when we can connect on stuff is always a thing, because I actually am the kind of person that is really driven by working with somebody. Like, I love partnerships, I love collaboration, and getting together and say, we're going to do this work now is actually really helpful for me in forwarding the process. So making our schedule sync up is sometimes a challenge. I think anytime with co-designing, you always have the like, who gets to make the call on something. We have not yet had a moment where it's been like a severe disagreement. Typically it's kind of like, okay, is there a mechanical importance to this? Okay, cool. Well, like, Tony's going to speak into it, and then we're going to make a call, right? But typically if it's mechanical, I'll make a call. If it's just sheer world building, and if art's leading the way, especially, then John's going to make the call, right? Like, he's never sending me an art piece and me saying like, hey, like, I don't like the way this looks, do it again, right? Like, that's not happening. Like, he's the art director for the project. He's also the artist for the project. And so when he sends me something, I'm usually just looking for, what do I love about this? What did you do on this that I want to include somewhere else in the project? Some of the character sheets work that he did was like taking some of the gross aspects of something. So like on the Slimori, which is the boogery character, right? He has the stat blocks like shooting out of a nose as like on snot. It's awesome. Like, it is visually beautiful, regardless of whether the subject matter is or not. And I was like, that's killer. I just need you to do that on every single one from now on. Like, you've done this thing, you have to keep doing it. You can't only do it on this one. It has to be like this on every single thing. And he's usually totally down for it. But yeah, every once in a while we'll have that tension of like, I think this, he thinks that. What about this? What about that? The biggest one was like on our roach people. We had 3 cool abilities we could have given them, and he liked all 3 of them. And I was like, yeah, but we can't, because every race only has 2 abilities. So I just need you to pick. And he picked. And then like a week and a half later, he was like, well, what about their ability to fly? I was like, we didn't pick flight as one of their abilities. We picked these 2 things as an ability. And so he was like, well, can we go back on that? And I'm like, that we can. We just got to pick 2 of them. Like, my only thing is we have to pick 2. I don't care which 2 we pick. I think they're all cool. We just got to figure out what it looks like. And so, we ended up going back, rearranging that, changing things around, and making it so they had like this ability called Flitter, which lets them kind of navigate terrain more easily. So, I mean, like, it's those kind of things. It's just kind of the figuring out the way. And I think when you've got 2 people in a process, that's not hard. When that team gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, that can get more challenging. But that's my background, is in like a lot of group theory, a lot of other stuff like that. And so just knowing like, hey, here's what I care about, here's what I don't. My primary thing is I want to create something amazing with John. And if that's the primary goal, then everything that keeps us moving towards making something great together is a success. And things that would break down that collaboration, arguments that are unessential, conflict, like, they aren't worth it, because they're working against that goal. And at the end of the day, I'd rather work with John on something else in the future because we have a good relationship than win an argument about something in the moment. And John pretty much, as far as I know, 100% reciprocates that. So if he doesn't,
John, if you're listening. Awesome. Well, there's a few weeks left for this pre-launch process before you actually launch on February 15th. What are you doing now to kind of like get all this wrapped up and ready to go for launch? Where can people be expecting, being in your community and waiting for it to go live?
Yeah. Our biggest delay has been getting Kickstarter to approve our page. There are a couple issues in that. A big part is right now. So I mentioned Zine Quest earlier. First year of Zine Quest was 2 years ago. 108 projects went live for Zine Quest in February, which February is a down month for Kickstarter. The first quarter is, right, because people are recovering from Christmas. It's whatever. And so 108, of which 100 succeeded in funding. The success rate on Zine Quest is incredibly high. So that's a 92% rate of success. Last year, there were 286 projects on Zine Quest, of which 91% succeeded. So 260 of those funded. This year, we will certainly see more than 300 games that are submitted for Zine Quest. A lot of them won't necessarily get approved because they won't follow the rules, or they'll get approved with some pushback because there are set things you have to do to be part of Zine Quest. But the games department is overwhelmed, which is really funny. A mutual friend of ours, Daniel, yesterday was like, there's no board games. It's all these like TTRPG stuff going up. Like, why isn't anybody launching board games or tabletop games right now that aren't RPGs? I was like, wait till like 2 weeks from now when 300 of them are going to be Zine Quest projects, because we'll see 300 to 400. So the games department is like reviewing page after page after page of small RPG products right now. And so it's just the back and forth on anything when something's not right takes a little bit longer. And so we just resubmitted this morning. Hopefully it'll go through review and be up by tomorrow. Regardless of that, the best link to go to, which doesn't go anywhere right now, and I should make it go somewhere because I'm about to say it live. I'll do that right after we're done, is going to be TTRPG, so tabletop role-playing game, right? TTRPG.link/repugnant will be the best place to go for anything related to it, because I can make that link point wherever I want. Right now, we'll just say that's going to point to my Twitter account, or to Plus One's Twitter account, and you guys can follow there, and when we launch, you guys will get notified about that. But we should have that up tomorrow, hopefully, if everything goes accordingly. And if not, I'll make sure that points to an email capture page sometime later on this week, so you can get notified when we go live. Other than that, just keeping an eye on Plus One's social media outlets. We're at Plus One EXP across the board, or Terrible Games. The best thing for that is actually probably to hop in the Terrible Games group on Facebook if you want information for that. Those are going to be the best locations to kind of stay up to date. But a lot of what we're going to be doing for the next couple of weeks is just continuing to push that out. I do a lot of indie role-playing game live streams and YouTube content. So we'll have mentions on a number of those about our upcoming project whenever it's appropriate to do that. If it's somebody else's video, we won't be. But when John's on those a lot of the time, I run them, so I'll be mentioning it regularly on there. We both have email lists already, but we'll be looking to build those email lists and then build up our follow page. A lot of the last year for me, and then for the last couple months for John, has been building authority and awareness for the project. So we've been teasing out test layout pages to a couple different Facebook groups, tweeting them out, letting people see the art, getting people excited. Every single time except for one, we've only ever had positive feedback. One guy wanted to make a really inappropriate comment about one of our things, and like John pretty directly lost it on him, and then was like worried about it afterwards. And I had hopped in below, and I was like, hey, John's already said everything we want to play, because this guy was like basically like, you're talking down to me, because he made a derogatory misogynist comment, and John just wasn't going to stand for it, and so like he unloaded on the guy, and then like I hopped in and I was like, hey, John's already said everything we need to say. And this guy's like, well, like, if you want my $15, and I'm like, yeah, no, your $15 doesn't entitle you to talk about women the way that you just talked about women. It doesn't entitle you to the way to talk to anybody about that. It also doesn't give you ownership over a creator's anything. Like, we don't want your $15 if your expectation is that with $15 it gives you a license to be a horrible human being. And John was like apologizing to me, and I was like, no, like, you were fine. This guy was a heap of garbage. And so anyways, stick to your principles. Like, I mean, like it is 100% ideal that like anybody who comes to you saying like, I'm a potential backer, but I want you to change something, they're not a potential backer. Like, they're not. Like, if they have input or ideas, they're never going to hold 15 potential dollars over your head as a reason why you should acquiesce to whatever their demands are. And if they're a despicable human being or saying horrible things, it's okay to to not want their money, right? And I think that's great. And so like I was like totally thrilled with John's response, even though it was very different than what mine would have been. Like John and I come from very different backgrounds and very different worldviews in a lot of ways. But one of the things we both share in common is we want to never punch down. And we always want people to be uplifted by the work that we do. And that's one of the reasons that at the end of the day, like I always love anything I get to partner with him on and working on things with him. And you've got to find those same kind of ideals in people that you're looking to partner with. And the hope is that they do have a different background, a different worldview than you, but you are building around the same ideals and the same principles in what you're doing. So other than that, everybody's always thrilled whenever we put stuff out that had nothing to do with the game. And so we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to kind of build authority for the project over the next couple of weeks. You know, last year, Beards and Beyond was 500. We funded almost 10x. This year, we're going in with $1,000 goal because we want to do a few more print things. I also want John to get paid well for the artwork he's doing. You know, system and layout work is challenging also too. Like I'm taking care of all that stuff, but the reality is John's just such a phenomenal artist, and so my immediate thing was like, let's go for a higher goal. Not really worried about hitting it per se, but it was another big thing. And then the other reason we moved back another 2 weeks, there are, like I said, hundreds of games coming to Kickstarter that are all going to be launching on February 1st and February 2nd in the Zine Quest category, and I don't want to have to overcome that noise. Week 3, and I do a lot of surveying work around this. Zine Quest is something I love every year. I'm very excited about it. I'm going to lose a lot of money next month, but I'm going to gain a lot of games. Anyways, that's a lot of noise to have to break through, and I think this is a good lesson for anybody thinking about how they're going to launch their game. If you know that there are 5 heavy hitters in the game industry launching on the same day as you, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that'll raise you up, right? And that's something to think about. If you know there are 200 other games that are heavy hitters launching on the same day as you, maybe you should just go 2 weeks later when they'll all be completely done, because they're all 2 weeks campaigns for Zine Quest. It's a different pay period, and almost no one is launching on that category. The week 3 of Zine Quest right now has the lowest number of projects by a massive scale out of any of the other weeks of the month. And so that's why one of the reasons we moved back to that month primarily.
Got it. Being strategic about the launch date and time, just to make sure that you're, you know, aware of the space and you're launching to, right, and when everyone's coming out. Got it. Yeah. I really appreciate you talking about kind of the principles that you stand behind too. Because as a backer, you know, I do follow game designers and people who create games. And, you know, if I believe in them, not only their game, but also them and, you know, the vision they have for the world and who they are, then I'm more likely to support them. So I'm really, really glad that you brought that up too.
Yeah. And it's such a huge thing. Like it is, and it is something, unfortunately, that divides our world and our community. Like I understand the desire to want to, like, I understand the desire to take a modern thing to want to read an H.P. Lovecraft book because you like the macabre horror of H.P. Lovecraft. I think you can do that in ways that don't necessarily support the horrible, like, racial injustices that H.P. Lovecraft thought were okay. Like, I think there are a lot of ways to navigate that conversation in a smart and intelligent way. And when we're pursuing design and when we're looking at how we build community and all those other things, we should always be trying to pursue those things that make things better. And as somebody who, like, has a strong set of ideals, has a really strong and consistent worldview around a lot of things, I'm always seeking to say, like, look, but what if I'm wrong about any of these things, right? And no matter how convicted I may be, one of my ideals is that I like to work with people who have a different experience with the world, because I have a limited perspective. And so even if I'm convicted that something that I think or know or believe is true, when I work with other people, it lets me see even what I already know in a broader context. And when I have people play my game who are not like me, hopefully the feedback they give me gives me that same understanding. And I think whether it's playtesting, whether it is the project itself as far as design and other elements, whether it's, you know, any aspect of how you're building your game, even marketing, You want to look at how you bring different voices to the table that can explore the idea you've created in new ways, because you will learn something new as a designer, and you will learn more about the good things your game brings and about the problems that may arise by that process than anything else that you will do. And like I said, even if that's just playtesting, like for Beards and Beyond, like there was some really interesting conversations that we had to come to, because people were like, well, it's all just male characters. And I was like, or not, like, whatever. Like, it's a place where everyone has beards. Like there's a whole group of people in the real world called Whiskerinas who either grow or build like fake beards and then compete in competitions with them. Like, go nuts if that's your jam. Like, or like, it's just somebody who has a beard, who is binary, who is a woman, who not binary, who's a woman, who's whatever. Like, that's all fine. Just do it, because guess what? Like we're playing a game already where everybody has magical powers based on their job and their beard. That's not a real I mean, it is a real thing, like on the DL, but it's not a real thing, in other games you're playing. And so I think all of our power and game fantasies should always be, how do we build people up? How do we broaden our human experience? How do we grow to see the good and true and beautiful things around what it means to gather around a table together in the light of somebody else's eyes and experience? That's one of the best things about games for me. So, I also, I'm going to guess that's Jeremy, who asked if he was one of the heavy hitters in chat. You're not technically a Zine Quest project because you're launching on too large of a piece of paper, but I'm super excited to back your game, and I think you're going to massively overfund. So just be ready for that. Jeremy's game Gordnak is going live. It's a phenomenal Mothership module that's if Mothership could be described, it's a sci-fi RPG as vanilla flavored, which would be really hard to do. Then Jeremy's is gasoline flavored, is what we talked about on the live stream with him the other day. Phenomenal sci-fi RPG that's coming out on that same first day as 200 other 300 other Zine Quest projects.
Lots to look forward to, that's for sure. Yeah. So remind us again, what is that link that everyone should be going to be notified?
Yeah, ttrpg.link/repugnant. And I'll also make one just in case you have, like I have a hard time spelling repugnant, that is ttrpg.link/grossrpg. Both of those will go to wherever is the best place at that moment to find out about Repugnant, whether that's our Twitter, the follow page, or anywhere else. I'll make sure after we're done here that those links all point to the best place to find out that information and to stay up to date.
Perfect. Well, with that said, thank you so much for being on here, Tony, and sharing all this with us. And remember, February 15th for Tony's and John's campaign is going to go live on Zine Quest here. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.